Welcome back to the modelling bench. I bought this Bachmann Class 85 body on eBay recently. It was very cheap. It's fully decorated, including the pantograph, all the roof detail, fully painted. It's got some lovely cab interiors at each end, and it was the grand total of £15. Seemed a bargain. So I needed a motor for it, and my local model shop happened to have this Class 86, which again has got a little bit of modification. It's got the larger buffers, and someone's filled in the head code box, so making it slightly later, so I can keep the body and use it on mine, but it's not as nice as mine. However, the chassis runs well, and again it was £35, so it runs beautifully. The bogies are approximately the same length, which is lovely, but as you can see, the body is slightly shorter. So we are going to shorten and convert the underframe, and we're going to fit the Hornby chassis into the Bachmann body. Now, you might argue, why did I not go and buy one of these beautiful models straight off the peg? Well, I could do, but they retail at about £100, and I've spent 50 at the moment. So maybe I ought to have done, but here's how we're going to do it. Need to really get the body off your chassis first, so it's the standard Hornby clip-on. And other than the additional wire, which we will remove, we'll take out the weights, put the body to one side. So first job is to check to see whether or not the buffer beam end will fit the curvature and the width of the body. Width of the body seems fine. The curvature at the end is a good fit. So if we put those in there, that seems to be quite a good fit. I obviously need to remove these, but I've got to be careful if I remove those because they actually hold the bogie. And then obviously I need to shorten the centre bit a little bit. So I need to look at my plans and work out which bits we're going to cut and which bits we're going to not. I might put a screw fixing in the middle, I think, to connect the two together, because I shall remove these and not have holes on the side of the body shell. So the cab interiors pop out of the interior here, so they will pop out quite easily if you just expand the bodywork slightly. They will actually then pull out, and you can see one end is pre-fitted with an engineer and a driver, which is lovely. The other end's got some rather nice seats in, and may well end up going into I-86 with some weight, of course. And then there's a cab lighting element in the roof of the cab, which must be just LED'd off these connections. So the first job is to remove the detail. I don't want to remove this completely. I think it's not going to help the functioning of the chassis at the moment. But if I file the detail away, it will allow these elements to slide down the outside, and I'm going to take the cab pip off it, and as I said, I'll put a screw mounting if necessary to hold the chassis onto the body. So it won't take long to get these flat. I'll come back to you when I've done one end. Right, so I've made the bolsters on the side completely flat. I've started to shape them so that they will match the little V shape that's on the bottom of the 85. I've also got to cut a little bit of clearance for these headlamp things, which may be backlit in future, so I've cut a little bit out the front corners. But now if I drop that in between those and I get it to drop in, you can see that that will now line up at the front end remarkably well. It's the same curvature, and that's starting to look right, and the chassis is going to fit inside. So I need to repeat for the other end, and then I've got to cut it to make it the right length, and then we'll sort out what's going on here. But we're going to cut it and get it to the right length first of all. So I'm also going to shape this so that it fits the V shape that you can see there. Whether or not I cut it out with the little hole or whether I live with that, I don't know, but we'll work on that in a moment. So because I've got the single pantograph body, I will have to, if I want the 80s version, to put some air reservoirs at the back, a little bit like these, but I'm certainly not dealing with the twin pantograph. And that's got a slightly different underframe to the other one. So the twin pantograph has a very slightly different underframe. So when I'm looking at my underframe, if I put my underframe on here, I've got a small battery box or something here that I'm going to use this little square section for, and then the rest is pretty much scrap, so that's going to all get cut off. On the other side, at the bottom here, I've again got a little bit here that's sort of half-size battery boxed on the bottom here that I'm going to reuse, and then I've got little bits and bobs. So I've got little bits and bobs at each end. So I'm going to cut the center section flush with the chassis, but I'm just going to keep little bits at each end. I'm going to keep this bit because that's the structural rigidity and the clearance for the bogie. The same at this end, but I'm going to clear the middle out and then shorten the chassis. So I've got a little weak point in the chassis here. So where it needs to be shortened, I'm going to shorten it right at that point. So the big cut is on. So we're going to start by cutting that chassis there and there. And then we've got two separate pieces. So I'm just going to trim those square. So that's a window side. So there's one bogie end in place. And you can see how much extra I need to cut off. So I need to trim that until it just fits inside there. Fractions of a millimetre. So I'm just going to take a little bit more off this one. So there we have the chassis fitting inside the body. I've now got to glue the joint up and get it structurally sound, and you can see I've started to trim these to match the little V shapes. So I've made the original bogie supports match the V shapes of the 85 units. I've also made the chassis sit flush. I've had to do a couple of apertures for the doors and the internal glass panes so that they sit in. And I've altered the angle here because the 86s have a little infill and the 85s don't. So I've just taken that out there. So I've used a little bit of plastic here and here to bridge the gaps in the chassis to give it a little bit of additional support. I've actually found that my EMA plastic weld seems to glue the chassis, so I've managed to glue it in situ with everything nice and flat. Now to take it out and make sure it's fully glued. So here's my chassis out. I'm just now going to check that that's glued along there, and then we'll leave it to dry. Time to fit the motors, see if we can get some movement. The original body came with cab lighting. It had Bachmann connectors, but I've found a quick release connector in my box of bits, and I've managed to wire them in so that they operate on direction. They go forward and back. So I've wired them in, hardwired them the right way, and then I've wired the connection into the chassis directly onto the motor, so it should then power up lovely. So if you look at the 86 bogie, you can probably get away with 85ing it by removing this little triangle and that little triangle, And if you remove the what looks like a shock absorber immediately next to it, there's also another shock absorber there, whereas on this frame it's relatively plain and open. And there's also a gadget on here that needs removing. Can't do a lot about this plate because this is the plate that Hornby uses to mount the bogey on and keep it level, so I'm going to have to keep that. But I have got this triangle which is attached to the body. If I put the two together like that, you can see it's got a lot less clutter on it. By the time I've painted that and given it a coat of satin or matte black, you won't notice the fact that it's been attacked at all. So that's what I'm doing with the motor bogies. So the chassis is assembled but without any weight. The original centre weight will fit in there, so that will be modified, and the original cab weight at this end will fit in the end still, but I've got to modify the end to clear the Bachmann body and take the cab lighting out, or at least move it, and then perhaps paint and deal it. Not quite as detailed as the nice cab detail at this end, which I put back into the Bachmann body because I don't need so much weight, and I can always put a little bit of weight on top of this element here. And if I take the rear weight off, the Bachmann body will fit over the chassis quite nicely and will fit on. So there we have the body on, and already we have movement. So here's the completed unit, even with cab lighting in. Looks rather smart. Rather pleased with it. So for about half the price of a Bachmann unit, admittedly I've still got to finish the middle, but I appear to have a working Class 85 which now joins the fleet. I think that's a rather good simple modification. If you've liked what you've seen, do like and subscribe. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the modelling bench.